I want to thank for inviting me to give this talk here, and actually I had in mind in the beginning to actually show that Erkki is defined by many roads, and I ended up not doing the proper scientific thing of taking all Erkki's publications, run a text mining into them, and clustering them using, for example, WebSum. But instead, I did a very simple word cloud with the titles of Erkki's 100 most cited publications. And the important thing here for me was actually to show that you have many different aspects into Erkki research. I'm not going to talk about most of them because it would take probably quite the rest of the evening, but mostly about some of the aspects that connect to the research that I did over the past 20 years in Erkki's supervision. And you have here appearing several of the keywords that I would find particularly interesting in this respect. So you have Hebbian, and Professor Oja has already mentioned his connection with Hebbian rule. Principal component analysis, independent component analysis, subspace analysis. So you have several of these aspects, and of course machine learning, neural networks, but they all appear in one way or another in his word cloud. Also this blind source separation, which is something of the late 90s, early thousands that Erkki helped shaping internationally. So I wanted to start before I joined Erkki's lab, and of course the reason why I started there is basically that you have this connection to physiology that Erkki mentioned in his inaugural talk. And actually, it was one of the reasons why I made the first contact to work with Professor Oja. I wanted to work with somebody that would do neural networks, but biologically plausible. And a Portuguese professor told me, I know two big names in that area. One is in a very small city in Finland, in Lappeenranta, and the other one is in the US. And my thoughts were, okay, I'm going to Finland. It's only my licenciate thesis. For the serious stuff, I will go to the US. That was 20 years ago. I like to say that I came here for curiosity. It was a sufficiently exotic country, and Lappeenranta seemed kind of a nice name to it. But I stood here because actually Erkki's work and actually Otaniemi's turned out to be such an important international hub for the things that I wanted to do that it made absolutely no sense to actually go anywhere else than here. I had too much to learn in this university to actually go anywhere else. So basically this slide is to show you a couple of papers from 76, 79, which Erkki has already shown, about vision, modeling in some sense vision. And that was something that I was particularly fond of. And then later on you have the Hebbian rule leading into PCA, and even into extended versions of that PCA, so subspace analysis. Then you had a nice thing. When I joined the lab, I remember that you were very interested also in minor components. And that was very interesting that not only principal components are of relevance. And in many applications, actually, the minor components were interesting. And I remember that was a topic of research at that time. And then basically, together with Professor Karhunen and Joutsensalo, there was a lot of research about nonlinear PCA. And the nonlinear PCA seemed to be not only nicely robust from a statistical point of view, it was nicely robust in finding the principal directions, but on top of that, it seemed to have very nice properties in separating signals. And I remember that one of my first tasks in the lab was to separate sinusoidal surfaces. Of course, everything is very interesting. Sinusoidal surfaces are very nice, but they are not very challenging. And there was always a motto behind whatever you do, whatever you try in terms of algorithmic development, do some simulations to make sure you know what you are doing, but then apply them into real data, and then we will see if they make any sense or not. So now we had something that was apparently quite interesting, and it was the ability of nonlinear PCA to actually perform source separation or separation of signals. So we had, Erkki mentioned in the very beginning one example of separating sources in a cocktail party problem. So I have an illustration of this cocktail party problem in here. Assuming that so basically we have I think one gentleman in the audience singing. We have a string quartet, and we have some newscast. And actually, each microphone, as Erkki mentioned earlier, is capturing the complexity of what is happening. The idea on blind source separation is actually that you undo this mixing and you produce pure signals.
The guardians of the electronic stock market NASDAQ, who've been burned by past ethics questions, are moving.
And our singer. So now we have a nice problem. Most measurements that we make, and we very often make, as Sami Kaskis pointed out very nicely, we have a big set of measurements, typically, of very big and complex phenomena. So I decided to name the next slide a cocktail party in the brain. This is a slight joke, but it's a fact that what is happening in the brain. There are always a lot of things happening at any given time, and you have typically hundreds of sensors collecting information at any given time, either with very high temporal resolution, like with EEG and MEG, or with a fairly high resolution in both time and frequency, like in fMRI. But the point is that what you are observing typically is a mishmash of a lot of things. Of course, some of the things are more prominent, some are less prominent, but you still observe them all. So we had nonlinear PCA, and we were playing around with nonlinear PCA on images and so on. But actually, although it had very nice statistical properties, it was still missing in speed and in other aspects. So, as also Erkki mentioned, ICA saw in the mid 90s a big transformation and a coming to age, I would say. all these is basically to state that, again here, Erkki Oja had a pioneering and influential work worldwide. Of course, some of his collaborators were also within his group, like Aapo Hyörinen. This is still one of the most widely used ICA algorithms to date. And of course, the book that Erkki mentioned, which is, I would dare say, after 12 years, still the best tutorial book, the best book to learn ICA and its implications. Now, for the second part of this talk, I want to highlight another thing that for me was quite important. Was that actually within the same building, there was another excellent center in the ground floor. It was a center that was doing also pioneering work and was probably one of the leading, if not the leading, centers in magnetoencephalography. And it gathered a lot of researchers from around Europe. And also in the mid-90s, you have even this paper here that is, I would still say today, the biggest reference in MEG. So to some extent what happened was that we had a nice framework, a blind cell separation framework. We had a nice tool, and now we had even a nice data and problems to work with. And the beautiful thing of it was that we had a very easy access to that through academician Ricardo, for example. I do remember, and I was wondering whether I would say it or not, I do remember, I think in '95, a lab meeting in the low temperature with academician Olli Lullansmaa, with Riitta Hari, with Mikko Sams, with Matti Hamalainen, and all of these were there to listen to what can those guys on the third floor do with neural networks in a specific domain. But it was a very interesting and very warming effect to feel that there were two fields that were very synergetically and very easily moving towards each other. So Erkki had some stint with physiology in late 90s, but it was not going to be the last time. So basically, medical application was to be one of the most accepted areas for ICA. So applications of ICA started with biomedical mostly, and still today, I would say that it's one of the best accepted fields for ICA. And we have here one of the first papers that we published together with the brain research group on artifact removal from MEG. This is definitely not a trivial problem, and it was very elegantly solved in this way. And I would dare say these were, again, pioneering works that Professor Oja was leading. We didn't stay only with the artifacts. We moved on into studying event-related activity, for example. And this is one paper where I believe it's considered, or it was considered, to be among the 1% in its field. So basically, it was an impactful contribution that Erkki's mentoring led into. And I want to give one example of MEG analysis on some data that was collected at the brain research unit, and it got nicknamed the Rudolph evoked fields. It comprised a subwoofer. Wondering whether no, but it has a subwoofer connected with a tube to a balloon. So the subject is with his hands on the balloon, and he's hearing the boom, boom, boom of the subwoofer, and he's feeling also in his hands the tactile stimulation of the reverberation. So basically, the subject is getting multiple stimuli, and the MEG that you are collecting is composed of many different components there. So our goal then was okay. So can you actually make head tails of this data set? And in fact, you can. You have here the two components that we have found. They are very neatly in terms of signal characteristics perspective, and even the location was very, very plausible. So we were very happy that basically ICA is not just a sort of dirty tool to clean artifacts, but was also definitely very efficient in handling brain data. Now, in the early 2000s, I think 2002, the campus got as well an fMRI machine. Of course, since the use of fMRI data for brain imaging was already then, and it is now, a very rapidly growing area. It was also an area where we wanted to see whether our tools, not just ICA, but our tools could actually work with this. I have here one example. Disclaimer: these two persons had nothing to do with the data. These were just to illustrate the machine and the type of stimuli that we had. And at that time, basically, it was very early days, and the study was only on somebody was listening to somebody else reading the safety instructions of the machine. It was sort of a calibration-like of the understanding of the machine. The nice part of it is that it allowed us to get first glimpses of things that were later on going to become quite interesting in default mode networks and steady state, but we were too early thinking about it for it to be immediately visible for us. Since I want to connect back to Erkki's direct work, this is an example of a study where the robustness of ICA, so from a theoretical point of view, but also from an applied point of view, on the same data set. So basically on this very simple, I listened to somebody else telling me what I should do if it catches fire. And basically the idea is to study proper theoretical and applied limitations of these ICA. And this is as recent as 2012, I believe. Still, as before, we didn't stay only in this very constrained setup, and there is additional work together on, and in this respect, connecting again to the second speaker, so Professor Kaskis. We tried to make sense out of the group of independent components that we get. We wanted to get further than just independence. So basically, if you have a multi-stimuli type of data, or response to multi-stimuli, what do you do? And basically what we found was that by using information from that stimulus type and of the independent components, so you can actually group the independent components into functional groups that together make more sense and are more complex processing than the independent components themselves. So this is a step towards getting more and more complex, but getting more and more explanation power to the data. I'm going to give you one quick example of something that is nowadays quite popular, which is this neurocinematics. So you observe a movie, and you try to get from the movie, and you record EEG, fMRI, MEG from the subject that is observing the movie, and you try to make sense out of the brain activity that comes with it. This is the movie. The sound is messed up, but this is just to tell you that of course, you have a lot of features from that movie that you can actually collect. And with the independent components, with the features, you try to group the independent components into something that makes sense. So you have a bunch of independent components, and you define a way of grouping these into functional networks to some extent. And each one of them has actually, I could explain in more detail, but each one of them has actually a meaning. I labeled one of them as the multimodal integration, so the first one, and the second one, the getting the joke as the second one because of the properties of these signals. The last aspect that I want to mention here is that Erkki was always available for new ideas. So if you come to Erkki and say, okay, so I have these, not all of them would work, but taking a risk was always part of the deal as well. So we, at some stage recently, came to Erkki's room and said, okay, there is this thing, this phase synchrony. It is speculated already for maybe 10 years that it is very much implicated in neuronal communication and motor control. Maybe we should have a look at that. So we have developed some tools for actually source separation, but now in synchrony, which is yet another field where I think that nobody else is currently doing. So basically another field where Erkki has supported this pioneering spirit. This is not done with synchrony. This was done with coherence, but it was a study again at that time with the brain research, and it was about corticomotor control. So I did a word map to start with, and I'm going to do now a word map to end with. And the word map to end with is of the same titles, but now the last 13 years. The last 3 years. So in the last 3 years, the map has changed. And this tells again that the many roads keep Erkki very much interested. So the end point here is there are many things that would describe Erkki as a professional. And I think that our rector has summarized better than I could definitely do. But I want to highlight here also the availability, the disponibility that Erkki has to actually listen, support, and encourage others to develop themselves into. So this is definitely a trait that I think makes for a great leader. So not only a great science person, but a great leader. So visionary, but at the same time having this ability to listen and to actually mentor. I stole the last slide from the Academy of Finland. Thank you.